Hi everyone. Today we are here to interview our two extremely talented gentlemen. We have with us today Jatin Sehgal. He's the global ISO leader for EY and the CertifyPoint managing partner, the certifying body of EY. We also have with us Arpinder Singh, who's the global markets leader and the India leader for forensic and integrity services practice for EY in India. And today we are here to talk about them, how the global ISO organization is really changing the way governance, risk and compliance operates for global organizations and multinationals as well as local organizations. So today I'd like to start with you, Jatin. My first question: why should an organization go for an ISO certification, and how does it change the strategy of the organization? What's the advantage that they get?
So your question is about how organizations should prepare for the ISO certification and get certified. So I'd say there are two steps in this. First is, why would an organization want to implement an ISO standard? It's basically very simple. There are many reasons. The topmost reason for me is to demonstrate corporate governance. Right? We talk about G, R, and C, the governance, risk, and compliance. It starts with good governance. And ISO standards have a proven framework which will give you step-by-step methodology to identify your business context, understand your business products and services, who you're catering to, understand your stakeholders. Uh, ISO standards also give you a good practice in terms of setting up your policies, right? So when you want to demonstrate a good governance and a good risk management, you should look at the ISO frameworks. Now, once you've implemented an ISO standard, you could say, I'm doing what it's supposed to be doing. However, you need a third party to validate that. And that's where the certification mechanism is very handy. You can call an auditor, they can come with their industry experiences, and they can certify you. So instead of you yourself saying, I'm certified and I'm doing all that I'm supposed to be doing, it's better that a third party comes and brings that added advantage and trust uh, in the ISO framework.
Thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense. But what I'd like to ask Arpinder you as well is that there are so many new standards around the compliance part, are separate from the data privacy section. So how do you say, ISO 37001, which is the anti-bribery standard, there's a new one on compliance. There are several guidance standards around whistleblowing, fraud mechanisms. How do you see them changing the field of forensic as such, and what organizations are doing?
So, Purva, that's a great question. In India, we don't have a lot of past cases. So, if you go to the US market, there's a lot of precedence in the cases. So, it tells you exactly what the system should be. It prescribes certain processes. The laws in India are fairly straight. They tell you this is the do's and don'ts. If you fall in violation of them, this is the penalties or this is the punishment. But it doesn't prescribe perfect systems. So, I feel an ISO standard is a perfect guide to look at from a system perspective. I see a lot of advisors kind of recommend their own framework, their own guidance. Companies get confused. They don't know whether it's company A recommending a good system or company B recommending a good system. So it's always preferred to go after a benchmark system, which I think is an ISO standard. Now, if you look at ISO, I mean, my perception is that it was always an ISO 27001 run game. It was a lot of adoption of that. I think with the anti-bribery and now the compliance framework, which is ISO 37001 and 37301, I think the reality is it's a great one for compliance heads, legal heads, and internal audit heads in India to look at that framework. I think as a first step, they should see how far is their current system against an ISO standard. At least do that benchmark. I would say the second step is see what are the gaps which you can mitigate. And then if you get the ISO standard, it's fantastic for stakeholders, like Jatin said. The shareholders will like it, your directors will get more comfort, you have a third party who's come and audited you. How can you lose anything? It's a win-win situation. And now I believe there's an AI standard. I mean, everyone's talking about AI and AI risks. There's no perfect law around it. There are no rules prescribed in India for that. But there's an ISO standard. Maybe you can start with that.
In fact, it's one of the first certifiable frameworks available to clients to actually go and demonstrate compliance and get certified against and say that I'm following good practices. That, I think, is also one of the values of the ISO frameworks. It gives you a step-by-step approach, like I mentioned, that you can get certified against, but it allows you as a marketing tool to go out and demonstrate, hey, I have the evidence that I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. It gives you access to new markets.
So another question, Jatin, I have for you, leading from what you just mentioned, is that there was a recent global outage for a very large technology company. We all heard about it and how it impacted, various industries because of the large dependency on it.
Right.
How do you see an ISO framework? Had it been put in place, how would it have changed? What would have been the scenario?
Yeah, let me tell you, I was stuck at the airports and I saw the blue screen, so I think that's the outage you're talking about. I get this question a lot. If I was certified or if I was following the ISO standard, would 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 I avoid such kind of a disruption? It's like asking someone, you wear the seatbelt and you will not meet with an accident. See, it's a control. A framework gives you a good view in terms of what you're supposed to be doing, right? As a good corporate citizen, we should be wearing a seatbelt while driving the car. Similar to that, you should be following good practices and make sure you're continuously monitoring it. Now, there is no guarantee whether you would have an ISO standard implemented and certified against and you would not have disruptions. So an ISO standard does not guarantee that. Let me clarify that. But it does give you the level of resilience. It sets a system that allows you to recover quickly. And that is how the ISO standards are supposed to be looked at. It's a robust framework that you can use to come back on your feet should you have a disruption.
Sure. No, I think that's quite useful to have a robust system in place so that even when the incidents happen, they really help you fix it in a.
It could have helped prevent the incident if you had followed the ISO system properly. So you would talk about a proper risk management. You would have controls in place. You would be monitoring these controls. You would be analyzing and measuring the effectiveness of the controls. And if you would have this in a systematic approach implemented, there's a good chance you would have detected something was incorrect. You would have prevented this from happening, or if now it happened, you recovered fast. Imagine if this was not the case. So you don't have a framework and something like this happens, it can take days of disruption.
That's true. That's true. That makes a lot of sense. On coming back to this, coming back to how the challenges are in terms of implementation. So I'd like to ask you one more question in terms of what are the challenges which compliance officers, legal heads, they face when in actual implementation? Because we've been supporting various clients in implementation of the ISO standards. How do you feel that the challenges that they are facing, and what are the things that they could do to overcome some of them?
I would say the biggest challenge is getting support for the compliance head or audit head, whoever is driving the ISO agenda. I think that's the most critical, because when you say support, there are two aspects to the support. One is money, because it costs money. You need to fund certain system changes. You need to fund consultants coming in who can guide you. You need to pay for the audit. So that does cost some money. Second is actually getting the intent to fix issues. So what I really love about the ISO standards, it's actually in spirit. It's not superficial. So you actually have to, whatever experience I've had, you actually have to fix the system. You can't just say it's fixed. You can't fake it, as you say. So as a result, third-party risk management, for instance, as a part of the anti-bribery system, which Purva, you and I both worked a lot on, it's a tough part. Getting a perfect TPRM system in a company is very, very difficult. Sanctions, everything's changing with geopolitical risks. How do you keep adapting the anti-bribery management system? So I would say it's not easy. It has to be resourced. It has to have the right intent. And then I think people have to have the willingness to sustain it, because it is year after year. The audit has to be done every year. So it's not a one-time exercise and you're all set in life. It happens every year. So you have to not only put it in place, in spirit, get audited, get it, but then you have to continue down that journey. So I think it's a fantastic thing. I would recommend that all board of directors who want to be totally comfortable with the companies they operate in, they should insist on ISO standards, because at least you'll come in for a board meeting, the company has good ISO standards, you'll be able to sleep better at night.
Sure. I think that so it's not just a tick in the box exercise. It has to be done in letter and in spirit.
Yes.
And that's very important to understand. Just want to add here, people who get into ISO certification audits believe I have to pass the audit without any findings. And that's a myth. I think when auditors come, you should encourage the auditors to find the gaps so you can understand the vulnerabilities in your system and fix them before maybe somebody from outside would find it. But also don't expect that you would have a perfect system when the auditors are coming. There is nothing called as a perfect system. It's a continual improvement system. You would have findings in the first year, and next year when the auditors would come, so much would have changed in your system that you would have even more findings. So don't expect your auditors to have zero findings, and don't live in the stigma of having a perfect system. It's a continual improvement. You need to be able to start, stop, and start again.
Sure. That's exactly what we were discussing sometime back in our class also,
Yeah.
that, it has to be continual and we have to make sure that we are monitoring and measuring all the factors,
You're
the
never
risk
done.
considerations.
You're absolutely not done, because uh, your controls will change. They will change in their maturity levels. Your processes would have changed. You would introduce new products and services. You would have changed in your management structure. You would have changes in your investor or partners' expectations. So you need to keep evolving, and hence you need to evolve together with your auditor.
Sure. No, I think that makes a lot of sense. So, Jatin, AI is the new buzzword, artificial intelligence. The whole world is talking about it. We're just moving from one GPT to another version. So, what is it about the new artificial intelligence management standard, which has recently been rolled out by the agency? How are you seeing the adoption around it? What are the new guidelines which the organizations should be following? How are you saying that the world is accepting that governance framework?
Yeah. So for me, ISO 42001 is the next big thing. Everybody is talking about AI, but also everybody is concerned about AI. And what are the concerns? There are two key concerns we're talking about in the world of AI. It's the AI's trustworthiness and its responsible use. Think about any industry. We're all impacted by it, be it healthcare, be it transport, be it utilities, um, be it education or pharma or financial sector. Everybody's impacted. So how do you use AI in such a way that you're actually increasing the stakeholder confidence? You're making people, users like you and I, believe in the usage of AI without being worried about its safety and its security. So when we say trustworthiness, there are certain principles we're talking about here, which are also covered in 42001 that help you actually meet with certain regulatory compliance. So like EU AI Act. So what are these principles? We're talking about fairness. Is AI system being fair? If I'm applying to a university, I'm a student, will it be fair if I'm not selected and somebody else who even has lower grades than me? So it's a decision taken by an AI system. Is it biased? If I, for example, go to a hospital and I need certain type of treatment and they refuse me, or if I need a heart transplant and that decision about my life and death is taken by AI and it refuses to give me a heart transplant because I'm from a certain community, that's bias issue. So everybody's concerned about the decisions made by AI, whether they be trustworthy, but also the responsibility. We live in a society and there are certain rules. What if AI is ignoring those rules? Who's checking? Hence, there is a lot of governance required, a lot of risk management required, and that's what is written down in these regulations. EU AI Act, for example, requires human oversight over AI systems. So if you follow the ISO 42001, you're actually step by step complying to some of these regulatory requirements. And like I mentioned earlier, this is the only certifiable standard today. So if you're implementing AI, if you're using a chatbot or any other form of Gen AI, ISO 42001 is, in my opinion, almost mandatory, because you're out there, you're providing your products and services. There are tremendous uses of AI, which is out there in the market. But if you haven't followed the right data training or you're not using the foundational models in the correct way, AI can create havoc.
Absolutely. So we'll be able to tackle and deal with the problem of hallucinations and the
Yeah,
deep fakes which are happening around the world and the misuse of AI.
absolutely. There's a lot of misinformation over there. It's almost like, when electricity came out, people said you touch it and you die. That's what
Right.
people are talking about AI. Now, how are we going to survive in today's world without electricity? Imagine. That is what's going to happen in the coming future. You cannot survive without AI. It's a necessary devil, but you need to control it. And standards like ISO 42001 are actually giving you the opportunity to control the devil.
Sure. Absolutely. I think before we end, sir, I have one more question for you. One last question. This is a lot of myths around ISO certification. What do you feel is the most common myth, which is absolutely untrue, and organizations should keep in mind?
Purva, I think that's a great question. I would put two, three myths, not just one. I think the biggest myth is after you have an anti-bribery and corruption management system, there's going to be no fraud. That's not true. It's just a system. The system at some point of time will show you an exception. There will be an issue. It doesn't mean that once you put the system in place, there will be no issue in the future. Same with the compliance system, and I'm sure it's the same with the AI system. A system is there. A system is there to show you exceptions. And I think the second myth is there should be no exceptions. In fact, I commonly joke with my colleagues when I go to a company and they say they have no whistleblower complaint. I say this company has definitely significant fraud or no proper system, because any company which has a system, whether it's an ISO system or any other system, must have exceptions. So I think the second thing I fully resonate with Jatin should be there. And I think the third is it's super difficult. It's not at all. In fact, if you have a good system, you should automatically get the ISO standard, because if you read the ISO standard, it is what commonsensically you should have as a system. So it's everything a company should anyway have. So I would say the myth is that, oh, it's so difficult, it's going to curtail our business, we'll stop, our revenues will go down if we have a system. But you should already have a system. It's just putting a form around it and documentation around it, which is super important. Fourth, I would say, I'm continuing with the myths, and I apologize for that. I love my myths. But the next one is the fact that people think over documentation is not required. But I think that's where we, in India at least, trip over. If you take the pharmaceutical industry, if you take any industry, we have always undermined the importance of documentation. While any system requires documentation, audit trails, and I think we as a country need to understand the importance of documentation, and I think the ISO standard gives that to you. Lastly, it's not so expensive. I would say even start with getting your compliance team, your audit teams, your legal teams ISO certified. That means the teams and individuals can become ISO certified. So one is you'll get the knowledge, you'll get the education, it's motivational for the team members. So if you don't want to get the company done, at least get your employees certified. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll simply add something to what Arpinder is saying. It's a myth that it's expensive and it brings audit fatigue. But what you're getting as a result out of this is also very important to quantify. You're bringing discipline into your operations, right? You have a system that is helping you implement controls, monitor them, measure them, analyze them, and evaluate them. So it brings discipline, brings structure. It actually helps you in reporting. You can go out to your stakeholders, your investors, your partners, and showcase you're following exactly the same kind of practices that they are following. So it enhances customer confidence, the trust. It allows you to trade easily. I know of a lot of clients who come to me when they have actually been rejected from RFP process because they couldn't participate because they were not certified. Now, what does that tell you? That tells you that there is a world out there that believes in these frameworks and standards. And if you don't have them, you're losing out. So there's so much to gain. And I think you need to look at that positive side of implementing an ISO standard and getting it certified. Don't look at it as a cost.
Right. So, Jatin, one last question before we end. Why is now the best time for an organization to go for an ISO certification?
Oh, I think this is one of the best times to go for an ISO certification. Look around the world, we're living in a mess. We've got war situation in a lot of countries. Sustainability is high on agenda. We're getting regulators putting more pressure. There's lack of confidence in the market. We're almost looming in a recession, right? So we're actually at an uncertain time. How do you then build confidence in such uncertain times? By showcasing leadership and showcasing good practices. If you have a basic foundation of a framework that sets you apart, that is customized to your organization, that will give you operational effectiveness, that will build and boost your confidence in your own practices, that you can utilize all of this to go to market, build new products, achieve growth in these times when everybody is concerned. So timing is now. It's hot. If you haven't done it, start, and start ASAP.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So, viewers, thank you so much for watching in. I hope you had some takeaways because I personally took some, because good governance is always good for business. And these ISO standards are really changing the way that we are working. And most organizations are going for this, and stakeholders are taking a lot of value from these ISO standards. So, I do hope that you come back to us with any further questions that you may have. Thank you.